Tonight we're in Thetford. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Nicky Morgan, former Treasury Minister and Secretary of State for Education under David Cameron, now a prominent Tory backbencher. Annalise Dodds, Labour's Shadow Treasury Minister and a former MEP. Business and industry spokesperson for the SNP at Westminster, Drew Hendry. Alison Phillips, columnist and editor of the Daily Mirror. And journalist, author, co-host of ITV's Good Morning Britain and a chum of Donald Trump, Piers Morgan. Welcome to our panel here, to our audience, and of course to you at home. You can argue along in the usual fashion. You know how to do it, using hashtag BBCQT on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. Join in the conversation. Right, let's have our first question tonight, which is from Kyle Bradshaw.
Should the leader of the opposition be protesting against the President of the United States?
Of course, Jeremy Corbyn was at a protest while Donald Trump was here. Nicky Morgan.
No, I don't think he should be, because actually, whatever we might think about Donald Trump, per se, actually he is the President of the United States, and one would assume that the leader of the opposition, I shall do all I can to stop him becoming Prime Minister, but presumably he wants to become Prime Minister, and as Prime Minister representing this country, he would need to have a relationship with one of our most important allies and the leader of one of our most important relationships around the world. This week, he has shown that actually he's not wanting to do that, take on that responsibility. But
well, he did try to have a meeting with Donald Trump, but
he tried
Donald Trump didn't appear to want to.
He was invited to the state banquet. He was invited, I think, to opportunities to meet him, and instead he chose to be out whipping up people into protest. Of course, there is a place for protest, there's a place for free speech, but no. The leader of the opposition, if he's serious about wanting to get into government, and he's shown this week that he is not serious about wanting to be in government, he is about protest.
Annalise?
I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that I don't agree with that. I don't think it was right, actually, that particularly during this week, we should have a state visit for somebody like President Trump. And it was a state visit. It would have been perfectly possible for him to come, quite rightly, to participate in those very, very important commemorations that we have on this week in an official capacity, as indeed did other leaders. But instead, the government decided to give him that state visit.
But you know the argument that's come up time and time again about this, which is why Jeremy Corbyn thought it was OK to go to attend a state visit for Xi Jinping of China, who's been massively criticised for human rights violations, mass detention of the Uyghur people. Why is that OK? But it's not OK to meet Donald Trump?
Because these are very different circumstances, because with the US, quite rightly, we've got a special relationship. That special relationship is based on democratic values, which sadly President Trump is not heeding. And even before he came into our country, he was criticising British institutions, some of which are not able to answer back. He was criticising members of our royal family. He was criticising the Mayor of London.
That he was.
And
was it a bit embarrassing when it came out about this meeting that Jeremy Corbyn had requested with Trump?
I don't think
because he was protesting.
No,
he'd requested a meeting, but that only became apparent when Donald Trump mentioned it. Was that not?
No, quite the opposite. The whole point of requesting that meeting is because we need to have a robust dialogue with President Trump. But according him, all that pomp and splendour of a state visit was completely inappropriate. And that was why Jeremy said, let's have a meeting, let's have that robust dialogue, but we should not be giving him that legitimacy through a state visit. And, this is not about the UK's relationship with the US. That's not what it's about. It's about whether it's right to honour President Trump in this way as an individual. And I'm afraid that's what we did this week. And that was the wrong decision. It should not have happened.
Piers.
Well, the truth about Jeremy Corbyn is, had he been a Hamas terrorist or an IRA terrorist or somebody like that, Jeremy... Sorry.
You're getting mass groans from the audience.
Fine.
Piers, I have to point that out.
You may not want to hear the truth, but it's the truth. Had had it been somebody of that ilk, Jeremy Corbyn would have been around there making them cups of tea. Just as he rolled up to the Buckingham Palace for the state banquet for President Xi of China, which, I mean, has a far worse human rights record than America. The point about it wasn't a personal visit. Donald Trump was invited on a state visit by the Queen, by Her Majesty the Queen, because it's the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And it was a chance to bring together these two great countries, which 75 years ago fought for our freedom and democracy. That's why Donald Trump was here. And, you know, we have to work out who our friends are in this world right now. It's a tough world. It's a rough world. And Donald Trump is the president of our #1 ally. And as we leave the European Union, which we have to do, and I'm sure we'll come to this, as we leave the European Union, never has that relationship been more important. And the spectacle, frankly, of the Labour Mayor of London spending 2 days before Trump even got here howling abuse about him in print and on the airwaves, and then the leader of the Labour Party, having been turned down for his meeting, then marching around, leading the protests, shouting and screaming. What kind of message does that send in the week of D-Day to the President of the United States, and more importantly, to the people he represents back in America, the American people who, when we needed them 75 years ago, they were there for us. Okay. And I think he can protest, but I'm also entitled to say that protest was unedifying and embarrassing to this country.
Let's hear from you. The man in the check shirt.
Her Majesty the Queen is regarded across the world as one of the best leaders there is. She is neutral and she has a great deal of diplomacy. What part of that does Jeremy Corbyn fill on a world stage?
Let's hit the man here. I'll come back to you, Annalise.
Piers made a point. We're just trying to leave the European Union, and never more than now. We're trying to be an outward-facing country. We've got to engage with countries all over the world outside of Europe, and then you have this kind of protest going on with one of the biggest countries in the world that we need to trade with, we need to engage with. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Woman at the back there.
Can I just say that that wasn't a proper demonstration? That was a disgusting spectacle of an effigy of Donald Trump, a US president, democratically elected. It wasn't a coup, he was democratically elected, sitting on a toilet in the middle of central London. That was disgusting. Sadiq Khan should be spending more time trying to control the knife epidemic going on in London instead of protesting against Donald Trump.
Can I see, is there anyone in the audience who supports Jeremy Corbyn's decision to protest? Yes, the man here in the jacket, in the striped shirt.
I think protest is all well and good. I think it's part of the democracy in which we live. But I think Jeremy Corbyn should have met Trump and he should have protested face to face with the man rather than on the street. That would have made him a much more credible leader of the opposition, which we are sadly lacking at the moment.
The man in the white shirt at the back.
Piers Morgan talks brought up about D-Day there, and I've seen a lot on social media about people saying it's disrespectful to the memory of those who fought on D-Day to protest in that manner. What I would say is actually more disrespectful to the memories of the people who fought on D-Day is to not protest and simply wave out a red carpet for a racist a misogynist, who is allowing who is allowing children to die in immigrant camps on his watch. You know, you talk about human rights. Where's the human rights for those who are dying in the immigrant camps he's setting up?
When you say they're dying, you're talking about children being separated from their parents. I think that's what you're talking about. Drew, Ian Blackford was also protesting, wasn't he?
Well, it is really important to engage with people when you don't agree with them. But let's face it, a state visit, which would have been requested by the Prime Minister through the Queen, a state visit is an honour, not a requirement for that engagement. And we obviously must, make sure that we're working with our allies and working with people to get that engagement, building on a strong relationship we've had with America.
But do you think that was right to be protesting?
But that relationship lasts long after Donald Trump has left office. That has been something that's endured for a long time and will endure. And it's really important to tell people when they've got things wrong face to face. I agree with the comment that was made earlier. So, yes, you should protest when it's appropriate. You should also engage when it's appropriate.
Did the SNP request a meeting with Trump?
Well, I don't know if we've actually requested a meeting, but I'm sure that we would have been willing to take one with him in order to point out that the policies that he's put forward in terms of being a climate change denier, in terms of saying that he's going to put the Iran nuclear deal in jeopardy by withdrawing from that he may come out of NATO are not helpful to our security or indeed to the benefit of people. And it's very clear that in Scotland, his values are not those values of the people of Scotland. It's very, very clear that people don't react that way. And for somebody who has separated parents from their children, and those children have actually been put in cages, it is important not to roll out the red carpet and enable that kind of behaviour. You can engage, but we shouldn't be enabling it.
We did roll out the red carpet for Barack Obama, and he deported 3 million illegal immigrants. He was known as the deporter-in-chief. Okay. And we also rolled it out for Tony Blair rolled it out for George W. Bush 6 months after the illegal Iraq war. So, Labour...
OK, but Piers, I want to hear from the rest of the
It doesn't make it right, it does mean there's a double standard about Trump, which I find a little bit irritating, frankly.
I think the thing with Donald Trump, as gentleman there said, there are clearly a lot of things about him that don't sit well with British values. I mean, we know he's been racist. We know he's separated children from their parents. We know that some of the ways that he's treated women have been appalling. But when you're in a high position in politics, you don't have to like everybody that you deal with. And I think if you look at the way the Queen tackled this issue this week, she was pitch perfect in that she had this bully, I mean, Piers may not agree, this sort of braying character who is what he is with Donald Trump. And she, in the state banquet, when she said about the importance of the institutions that have kept us security and stability since the Second World War, you hope that he listened to those words, and you hope that in this week of all weeks, and D-Day, he sees the value of alliances, and that is the message you would have liked Jeremy Corbyn to have taken to him face to face, rather than down a microphone at a rally.
Over at the back.
I very much agree with your point, but I would question if we should be honouring a man who wants to negotiate for our NHS as part of his trade deal when he arrived in this country.
I mean, I completely agree on that point, but I think you have to negotiate with people where you may not like what they say, you may not want to agree with them. And I think the very idea that the American pharmaceutical companies or American businesses have got their sights set on our NHS is absolutely abhorrent, and it has to be stopped at all costs. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't speak to people.
Let's have a question from Toby Rideout, which is exactly on this point.
Yeah. Should we be concerned that Donald Trump is eyeing up the NHS?
Annalise?
Yes.
Yes, is what you're going to say.
In one word. I mean, I could just finish my answer there, but we...
Well, that would be a novelty.
Thank you. We should be concerned, but I think we should also be concerned that when he said that from a podium, he had the UK Prime Minister next to him, and she didn't contradict him. She didn't say, no, we don't agree with that. She just said, well, in a negotiation, you've got two different parties who negotiate, and kind of flannelled on. She didn't say, that's not what we're going to do in the UK. So it's very, very concerning.
I mean, Eric, some American firms do already supply services to the NHS.
Yes, of course, but they don't do so in the kind of untrammelled way that we've seen in many other countries that have a completely privatised health service. And I think that's the concern that many people have.
Is that your genuine concern, that the NHS would be completely privatised? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, let's be honest, we've already got quite a lot of privatisation. It's proceeding apace, sadly, under the current government. But if we did have the the cancer scanning service in the Thames Valley is currently about to be handed over, it appears, to a private provider, even although we've been told that there won't be any more privatisation under the current Secretary of State of Health's watch. But I think there is a real problem when you start to cover services in trade deals, because then legally it's very, very hard for governments to say, no, actually, you can't touch that, because then the company can just say, well, actually, according to this trade deal, yes, we can. And if you don't like it, then we'll take you to an international court and we'll sue you. And that has happened in relation to some other countries' services. So we should not be letting it happen to our NHS.
Now, Piers Morgan, Donald Trump said everything would be on the table in trade.